The Ho president stood on my land, waving a legal notice and telling my son that our family farm now belonged to the community. She thought I was just some quiet widower living on forgotten property at the edge of the neighborhood. What she didn't know was that I had the original deeds, the survey maps, and one truth that could destroy everything they built. My name is Daniel Mercer, and for most people in Cedar Hollow, I was just a quiet man at the edge of the water. I lived alone in the old farmhouse my grandfather built with his own hands in 1958, long before the subdivision, long before the polished entry sign, the decorative stone walls, and long before the people inside that gated community started calling themselves the heart of this town. My land sat just beyond the Cedar Hollow Estates neighborhood, where the paved roads ended and the old gravel lane began. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. 42 acres of open pasture, hardwood trees, a red barn, a machine shed, and a lakefront strip that had belonged to my family for 3 generations. My wife, Emily, used to say the land had a memory. She believed that if you stayed quiet long enough, the fields would tell you every season they had survived, every storm they had endured, and every name of every person who ever worked them. After she passed away 3 years earlier, that land became more than home to me. It became the last place where her laughter still felt close. Every fence post, every porch board, every crooked shelf in the kitchen still carried her touch. So when the Ho president stepped onto my property and called it community land, she wasn't just making a mistake. She was declaring war on the last piece of my family I still had left. It started on a Tuesday morning in late spring. The grass had finally gone thick and green after weeks of rain, and I was down by the western fence line replacing a broken section when I saw a white SUV rolling slowly up the gravel lane. It didn't belong here. People from Cedar Hollow rarely came this far unless they were lost, curious, or looking for trouble. The SUV stopped near my mailbox, and out stepped a woman I had seen from a distance but never spoken to directly. Tall, blonde, sharp haircut, expensive sunglasses, a blue blazer even though it was too warm for one. She moved like the world had already agreed to obey her before she opened her mouth. That was my first close look at Vanessa Whitmore, president of the Cedar Hollow Homeowners Association. Behind her stepped a younger man carrying a clipboard, and another woman holding a folder stuffed with papers. They were dressed like they were arriving for an inspection, not a conversation. I walked toward them slowly, wiping my hands on an old rag. Vanessa looked around my yard with visible disgust, taking in the tractor by the shed, the stacks of lumber, the rusted cattle gate leaning by the barn, as if every item offended her personally. "Are you Mr. Mercer?" she asked. "I am." She gave me the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. "I'm Vanessa Whitmore, president of Cedar Hollow Estates. We've had multiple reports regarding this parcel." I glanced at the lane behind her. "This parcel?" "Yes," she said, looking at her folder. "The lake-adjacent strip, the barn lot, and the lower meadow. According to our legal review, those areas are now considered community access property under the expanded subdivision use plan." For a second, I thought I had heard her wrong. I actually laughed. "Community access property? Yes, this is private land." She opened the folder and held up a paper like a judge announcing a sentence. "According to revised neighborhood documentation, that section is subject to shared community use. You've also been reported for maintaining unauthorized structures and barriers preventing resident access." I looked at the paper, then at her. "Who reported me?" She smiled again. "Several concerned homeowners." That phrase, concerned homeowners, I had heard it before in town meetings, code complaints, noise disputes, and every other situation where people with too much time and too much confidence tried to control land that had never belonged to them. I folded my arms. "Let me make this simple. Your neighborhood begins at that stone marker by the paved road. My property begins here. It has for decades." Vanessa tilted her head like she was dealing with a slow student. "Mr. Mercer, I think you may be relying on outdated assumptions." "Outdated assumptions?" "My grandfather's deed was not an assumption. The tax bills I had paid every year were not assumptions. The fencing permits, the agricultural classification, the title transfers, the probate record after my father passed, none of that was an assumption." But I said nothing. Instead, I asked the only question that mattered. Who gave you permission to come onto my land? The young man with the clipboard shifted nervously. Vanessa didn't. We don't need permission to review property that is under community claim. I took one step forward. You do if it's mine. For the first time, her smile tightened. She handed me the paper. Take a few days to review the notice. If the structures and barriers remain in place, the association will proceed with enforcement. I looked down at the paper. It wasn't a deed. It wasn't a county filing. It wasn't even a court order. It was a typed-ho violation notice with bold lettering and enough legal-sounding phrases to frighten anyone who didn't know better. But I knew better. I also knew people like Vanessa depended on one thing more than anything else: intimidation. They counted on confusion, fear, delay, and the simple fact that most people didn't want a fight. Unfortunately for her, she had come to the one piece of land in this county where every line, every easement, and every original marker had been discussed at my dinner table since I was old enough to listen. You're mistaken, I said calmly. Her jaw tightened. Then prove it. I handed the notice back without looking at it again. I will. She turned sharply and motioned to her assistants. As they headed back to the SUV, she paused at the mailbox and said over her shoulder, "Once this is resolved, I suggest you remove that toll chain gate by the lake. Residents have complained they can't get through." I stared at her. Exactly. She left in a cloud of gravel dust. I stood there in the quiet for a long moment after the SUV disappeared. Then I walked back to the house, took the old brass key from the kitchen drawer, and opened the locked cabinet in my study. Inside were the records my father had kept trapped in wax paper and canvas: original surveys, deeds, transfer documents, water access maps, tax stamps from years before I was born, my grandfather's handwritten notes from a boundary dispute in 1974, county seals, registry copies, a full chain of title going back to when the property was first split from a larger agricultural tract. I set everything on the table one piece at a time. That was when my phone rang. It was my son, Caleb. He lived 40 minutes away in Brookside with his wife and daughter, and he called every Tuesday evening. But this was early. "Hey, Dad, you're calling before 6. That means either something's wrong or Emma wants tractor rides again." He laughed. "No tractor rides today. I'm actually calling because Emma told me something weird. My granddaughter Emma was 10, smart as a whip, and far too observant for anyone's comfort." "What did she say?" "She said when Rachel dropped her off on Sunday, there was a lady in a white SUV parked by your mailbox taking pictures." I looked out the study window toward the lane. "That sounds about right. Who was it?" I told him. Silence. Then Caleb said, "A broken bar. This is about the lake strip, isn't it?" "Looks that way." He exhaled sharply. "I knew it. I heard something 2 weeks ago." "What something?" "At the hardware store, 2 Cedar Hollow residents were talking about a future walking trail and a picnic access point by the water. They said the Ho president had found a way to include your lower field in the neighborhood expansion plan." I leaned back in the chair. "So this started before today, apparently." I looked down at the old records spread across the table. "They're not just guessing, Caleb. They've got papers, real papers, fake confidence on official-looking paper. That woman picked the wrong family." I smiled despite myself. She did. That night I barely slept, not because I doubted my position. I didn't. I knew the land was mine. What bothered me was the boldness of it, the sheer nerve required for someone to walk onto private family property and announce that it now belonged to a subdivision built 60 years later. That kind of confidence only came from one of two things. Either Vanessa was unbelievably reckless, a broken bar, or someone had convinced her she had cover. The next morning, I drove into town and stopped at the county records office. The clerk at the front desk was an older man named Raymond Ellis. I had known him for years. He handled records carefully, spoke slowly, and hated nonsense almost as much as I did. "Morning, Daniel," he said. "Morning, Ray. I need certified copies of every filing tied to Parcel 18 West, lake boundary included. Also any subdivision amendments touching the Cedar Hollow development." His eyebrows rose. "That sounds like trouble." "It walked onto my property yesterday wearing a blazer." He nodded once. "Say no more." An hour later, We were seated at a long review table surrounded by document boxes and map drawers. Ray slid a large plat map toward me. There, original Mercer boundary, filed 1961, recertified in 1987, updated for tax coding in 2009, still intact. He placed another stack beside it. Now here's Cedar Hollow Estates. Initial phase, then phase 2, then the shoreline amenity proposal that failed. I looked up. Failed? Ray nodded. 3 times, actually. County rejected it because they didn't control the western access strip. My eyes narrowed. The access strip that runs through my lower meadow. Exactly. He opened a newer packet and frowned. Well now, that's interesting. What? There was an inquiry filed last month by a legal firm representing Cedar Hollow Estates. They requested clarification on community boundary assumptions relating to Western Lake use. Assumptions. That's the word they used. Was anything granted? Number. They requested interpretation, not ownership change. Big difference. I stared at the page. So that was it. Vanessa had not acquired my land. She had not won a hearing. She had not secured a court order. She had asked a question, then acted as if the answer had already gone her way. That was worse in some ways. It meant she knew she didn't have legal ownership, but she was betting I didn't know that. He kept flipping pages until he stopped again. His expression changed. What is it? He turned the file toward me. Attached to the inquiry packet was a proposed concept rendering for future neighborhood waterfront integration. There it was in full color. A walking trail cutting through my lower meadow, a bench area near my dock, decorative signs, and, unbelievably, a community heritage barn label placed directly over my machine shed. I felt a heat rise in my chest so fast I had to stand. They mapped my land into their amenities. Ray looked uneasy. This wasn't approved. I know. Daniela broken bar. Number. They know exactly what they're doing. I took certified copies of everything, thanked Trey, and drove straight home. By the time I pulled into the yard, 2 sedans and a golf cart were parked just inside my gate. 9 Cedar Hollow residents were standing near my barn, one of them taking pictures while another pointed toward the lake. And there, wearing a beige sun hat like she was touring vacation property, stood Vanessa Whitmore. I got out of the truck and shut the door harder than necessary. What are you doing on my land? Everyone turned. Vanessa removed her sunglasses slowly. Mr. Mercer, we're conducting a preliminary site review. I walked toward them without hurrying. No, you're trespassing. A man in loafers and a tucked-in polo shirt stepped forward. Sir, we're whole board members. That means absolutely nothing to me out here. Vanessa held up a hand to stop him. We're trying to avoid escalation. I laughed once. By bringing a tour group onto my farm? She ignored that. Residents deserve lake access. The community was promised certain quality of life features when they purchased in Cedar Hollow. We are simply evaluating options. I stopped 10 feet from her. You sold them promises on land you do not own. Her face hardened. The matter is under review. No, I said, my voice lower now. The matter is settled. You just don't like the answer. The woman with the camera looked uncertain. Vanessa, maybe we should Vanessa cut her off. Mr. Mercer, if this goes to litigation, it will become expensive for everyone. We're prepared to be reasonable if you cooperate. There it was. Not law, not proof, pressure. She wanted me to sign something. Surrender access, agree to use, accept money. Anything that created a wedge in the record. I had seen enough. I pulled the folded certified plat map from my truck and opened it across the hood. Come here, I said. Vanessa didn't move. I pointed to the survey lines. This is the Mercer tract, filed 1961, recertified by the county. Here is the western meadow. Here is the lakefront strip. Here is the barn lot. Here are the original markers, including the iron pin you're currently standing 5 feet from. No one spoke. Then I placed the subdivision file beside it. Now this is your neighborhood. Note the boundary. It ends here, not there. Here. The man in loafers leaned in. His face changed first, then the woman with the camera. Vanessa remained expressionless, but I saw the tension enter her jaw. You can't verify that from a paper map on a truck hood, she said. You're right, I replied. The county can, and they already have. I handed her a certified copy of the rejected shoreline proposal. Her eyes scanned the page. For the first time since she arrived, She looked unsettled. This doesn't change the fact that the community has legitimate expectations. Expectations are not ownership. She folded the paper too quickly. We'll have our attorneys review this. I stepped closer. Good. And while they do, tell them to explain why you brought residents onto private land after the county denied your shoreline integration proposal. That hit. The board members looked at her at once. The man in loafers frowned. Denied. Vanessa turned sharply. We're leaving. She gathered her things and marched back toward the golf cart. The others followed. Slower this time, each carrying a different version of the same expression. Doubt. Once they were gone, I chained the gate, posted fresh no trespassing signs, and called Caleb. They came back. I told him, let me guess, tour group, board members included. You want me there? Number, not yet, Dad. This is escalating. I know. That evening, just after sunset, there was a knock at my front door. I opened it to find my neighbor Hank Dobson standing there with a cardboard box. Hank owned the hayfield south of mine and had more useful local information than any official office in town. What's in the box? I asked. History, he said. Inside were photocopies, old newspaper clippings, and 2 grainy black and white photos. Hank stepped into the kitchen and set the box down. My brother-in-law used to do site prep contracting. When Cedar Hollow was first built, he kept records on every dispute the developer had. I picked up one of the photos. It showed bulldozers near the current subdivision entrance, with my father standing beside a county truck. Your dad stopped them from pushing into the meadow back in '93, Hank said. Developer tried to claim there was confusion in the old agricultural lines. I looked closer. There was another man in the photo too, wearing a suit, pointing at the ground. Who's that? Original developer, Martin Kessler. I knew the name. Everyone in the county did. He made a fortune building subdivisions, then left behind a trail of lawsuits, unpaid contractors, and conveniently missing paperwork. Hank handed me a clipping. The headline read, County halts Cedar Hollow expansion over access dispute. I looked up. Why haven't I seen this? Because nobody cares about old land fights until they start another one. He pointed at the article. Read the 3rd paragraph. I did, and there it was. The development had been specifically denied western expansion because the Mercer family retained documented historical deed control over the lake approach and adjoining meadow parcel. Not assumed control. Documented, historical, deed control. I sat back slowly. Vanessa wasn't just wrong. She was repeating a land grab that had already failed 30 years ago. Why are you bringing this now? I asked. Hank shrugged. Because yesterday I saw 3 Cedar Hollow residents measuring near your fence. Figured the rich folks were getting ideas again. I smiled faintly. They are. Before he left, Hank said something that stayed with me all night. People like that don't back off when they're embarrassed, Daniel. They back off when they're exposed. The next morning, exposure arrived on its own. At 8:12 a.m., my granddaughter Emma called me from Caleb's phone. Grandpa, morning, sweetheart. Daddy says I'm not supposed to bother you, but I need to tell you something. What is it? That lady from the white SUV came to our house. I straightened in the chair. What? She talked to Daddy outside. She said if you didn't cooperate, the home might make things difficult for the whole family. My hand tightened around the phone. Caleb took over immediately. I was going to call you. She showed up unannounced at 7:30. What exactly did she say? That litigation can create collateral complications for associated family members using disputed property. I went cold. She threatened you. She wrapped it in neighborhood language. But yeah, I stood and walked to the study window again. Did you record it? Number. But Rachel heard enough from inside to know what it was. I looked out toward the barn, the fields, the lake beyond them. The line had been crossed. Not legally. Personally, she had gone to my son's house to pressure my family. That ended any possibility of patience. By noon, I was back at the county office with Ray. And this time I wasn't asking for copies, I was asking for sworn certification. Then I visited an attorney in town named Miriam Cole. She specialized in land disputes, old deed conflicts, and people foolish enough to confuse confidence with legal standing. She reviewed everything in silence for nearly an hour. Finally, she removed her glasses and said, Daniel, This case is cleaner than most fence disputes. They have no ownership, no easement, no access rights, no active county approval. They appear to be bluffing through an whole process and hoping you yield. What if they don't stop? She smiled slightly. Then we stop them. 2 days later, Cedar Hollow held its monthly whole board meeting in the clubhouse. Miriam insisted we attend. When we arrived, the parking lot was full. Word had spread fast, and residents had come expecting drama, or entertainment, or both. Inside, Vanessa stood at the front of the room beside a projection screen showing a render of the future waterfront community enhancement plan. My land was on it again, my barn, my meadow, my shoreline, labeled as if already theirs. She began with the polished confidence of someone accustomed to controlling a room. Cedar Hollow has long sought to improve resident access and preserve our community's natural assets. After extensive review, we believe the western tract adjacent to the lake may qualify for community integration under historical use interpretation. False, Miriam said from the back. The room turned. Vanessa froze for a fraction of a second, then smiled tightly. And you are? Miriam Cole, counsel for Daniel Mercer, the owner of the land you are currently displaying as community property without title, easement, or county authorization. The room exploded into murmurs. Vanessa straightened. This is not the time for theatrical interruptions. Miriam walked forward and placed a file packet on the front table. Then let's keep it simple. You represented to your residents that private land could be absorbed into community use. You entered that land repeatedly after notice. You brought others onto it. You issued false enforcement documents. And this morning, we filed formal notice with the county and sheriff's office documenting all of it. Vanessa's face lost color. One of the board members half rose from his chair. Vanessa, is that true? She snapped. Sit down, Miriam continued. We also obtained the original chain of title, the certified boundary maps, the rejected shoreline integration filings, historical county records from 1993 confirming prior denial of the same attempted expansion, and witness statements regarding intimidation of the Mercer family. Now the room wasn't murmuring, it was boiling. Residents began talking over one another. What do you mean private land? You told us the walking trail was approved. I already paid the special assessment. Vanessa banged a small gavel on the table. Please see order. But it was too late. Miriam opened the largest file and removed a yellow document encased in plastic. This, she said clearly, is the original Mercer deed transfer, signed, recorded, and preserved. It grants full ownership of the disputed tract, including lake approach, barn lot, meadow access, and western shoreline control. It has never been extinguished, never transferred, and never subordinated to Cedar Hollow Estates. Then she turned to me. Mr. Mercer? I walked to the front and looked out over the room. Some people looked angry, some embarrassed, some stunned. A few looked at Vanessa like they were seeing her clearly for the first time. My,